I'm Cyndi Briggs, and this is Soldier's Heart.
War started in 1941.
This is Henry Wilson.
It was a Sunday afternoon. Me and a couple of fellows were standing by a fire hydrant. I can go down to just about a place where Wells Fargo Bank is now. On that corner there, it was a fire hydrant. Me and some of the guys just BS that Sunday afternoon, and then the radio stopped blasting. The Japs done bomb Pearl Harbor. The Japs done bomb Pearl Harbor.
We interrupt this broadcast to bring you this important bulletin from the United Press. Flash, Washington. The White House announces Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor.
That's the only thing you could hear on the radio. And I knew, the draft's going to come out there, the draft during that time. And so I know when I reached the age of 18, my time was coming. So I had no fear about going because I just wanted to get the experience. The draft came about, and I was drafted in January 1943. Yeah.
The American involvement in World War II was about to reach its peak when the Army came knocking for Henry Wilson. He was a young black man living in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, a city segregated along racial and economic lines. He'd recently graduated from Atkins High, the all-black school on the east side of town.
All right.
I want to take a moment here to tell you about Atkins High School and why it mattered so much to Henry and to other black people living in the South in the 1930s and 40s. See, Atkins opened in 1931 with the help of a grant from the Rosenwald Fund. This fund was started by Julius Rosenwald, who was a part owner and president of Sears Roebuck and Company. He donated millions of dollars to establish schools all over the South so African American children could get an education. Here's something to think about. Julius Rosenwald was born in 1862, right in the middle of the American Civil War. In fact, he was born and raised just a few blocks from Abraham Lincoln's residence in Springfield, Illinois. The emancipation of slaves was the defining social event of his young life and obviously influenced his philanthropy as an adult. In addition, Rosenwald was Jewish. His parents immigrated to the United States from Germany to start a new life. And now Henry Wilson, an educated, motivated, young black Southern man, a beneficiary of his philanthropy, was about to help in the fight to overthrow one of the world's most destructive dictators, hell-bent on eliminating Jews from the face of the earth.
We were young, robust, and very enthusiastic.
Sounds to me like Julius Rosenwald made a smart investment. Let's bring this story back full circle, back to Henry Wilson. After he received his draft notice, he was processed at Fort Bragg and then sent to Camp Swift, Texas.
Hot in the summertime, down there, 110 degrees in the shade. And out there on the news, go out on those old planes, they abandoned ranch and stuff like that, rattlesnakes and bears down there in Texas.
Then he took a troop train to Massachusetts through the Midwest.
All through the Midwest, they had the shades down, because I guess people, saying that didn't want to see the troop movement too much, but we managed to have, get the shades up sometime, look at that, people be waving on soldiers, everything, applauding us and everything.
On September 4th, 1943, they boarded a Liberty ship bound for England, where Henry was assigned to an engineer dump truck company. In World War II, the armed services were segregated, and most African Americans were assigned to non-combat duty. For listeners, I'm making air quotes around the words non-combat, because these soldiers were most definitely in the thick of things. Henry landed on the beaches of Normandy just 10 days after D-Day.
Well, I tell you what, it was still the stench and smell, dead bodies, animals and stuff like that. The stench and smell of that. And some of the cities were just leveled just about, from the bombardment, because I think the Americans and the Allies, they just saturated some of those towns there, where the Germans occupied,
Henry and his fellow soldiers hauled supplies into dangerous areas, repaired roads and bridges that had been destroyed by German bombs. They also laid minefields and deactivated German mines to protect the advancing troops. They definitely experienced combat conditions.
And so we were subjected to a German strafing. But the more thing I feared most was the German buzz bombing. They used to send them rocket bombs over, and you hear something, pop, 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 you know it's going to fall. You don't know where it's going to fall at. Those things were really very devastating.
And you remember that sound really well.
Yeah, when the head comes, it's pop, 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 it's getting ready to cut off, you know it's going to fall. You don't know exactly where it's going to fall, but it's very devastating. And had to be careful walking because the German had a man called the Bouncing Betty. And if you step on that thing, by the time you get up about chest high and explode shrapnel, it just tear you all to pieces. And that was a man that I was very much wary of, the Bouncing Betty.
After making their way through France, Henry's company arrived in Belgium just in time for the Battle of the Bulge, which began in December 1944. And then you were in Belgium for the Battle of the Bulge, it sounds like.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What do you remember about that? What do you remember about
the coldest I've ever been in my life? I had enough cold from December the 15th to January the 5th to last me a lifetime. I ain't no lasting, I'm telling you. I never seen it so cold, nothing like it. And it was snowing, and visibility was zero. You couldn't see nothing. And you hear the rumble of tanks or trucks and stuff like that, artillery fire, mortar fire and stuff. But just cold and visibility was just zero. I thought I was gonna lose my toes, from trench foot and all that stuff like that. They had 2 or 3 pair of socks and combat boots, but still it was cold and get wet. They had old dubbing to put on them combat boots, but it didn't keep the moist out. You soak foot and your feet get wet, and you get a chance to change socks. We have socks under all of them, coats and everything up under your arms that keep them dry, and you get a chance to pull the boots off, put new socks on. That's had the dry ones under the armpits there, put in there, take them old wet, soggy, cold socks off. Yeah. We had sleeping bags. That helped a lot. Sometimes you can have time to dig a foxhole, but a lot of times you didn't have time digging a foxhole. Just sleeping bag underground, under a truck or under a tank or anything like that. But see, we was exposed to the weather and everything. Yeah. The truck wasn't much good, tell you that, because you're scared the artillery shell hit it, and then the truck's going, you're going too.
The Battle of the Bulge proved to be a turning point in the war, when the Allied forces finally contained the German troops and began to force them from occupied territory. Tank units were critical to this success. One tank unit holds particular meaning for Henry.
And that was the turning point there for the Americans there, because John Patton was sending those tank units up from the south, 3rd Armored Division, to rescue those people that went, and they had an all-black tank unit, the 761st Tank Battalion. They was the spearheading for John Patton then. And those were some fierce fighters, because one time they said the black man wasn't capable of, fighting, combat stuff. But the 761st Tank Battalion turned out to be one of the spearhead units for John Patton's Third Army there. And they didn't want to came through and broke through in the Bastion to rescue the 101st Airborne Division there.
The 761st Tank Battalion insignia was a Black Panther, and their motto was, "Come out fighting." Very few white officers believed they were up to the task of combat, but they were, and more. They opened up the Siegfried Line so American troops could enter Germany, and they were among the first Americans into Austria, where they met up with Russian soldiers on the Enns River. Collectively, they were awarded 300 Purple Hearts, 11 Silver Stars, and 1 Medal of Honor. The battalion received a Presidential Unit Citation for its actions. Ultimately, they were called one of the most effective tank battalions in World War II. One member of this tank battalion particularly stands out, a man named Jack. While on a bus transport in Fort Hood, Texas, he refused to sit at the back of the bus when ordered to do so by the white driver. He was court-martialed and charged with insubordination, and then transferred to another battalion. He was ultimately cleared of the charges but never got to fight with his brothers overseas. After the war, he began a career as a professional baseball player. It turns out he was pretty good at it. On April 15, 1947, he started at first base for the Brooklyn Dodgers, the first Black man to play in the major leagues. By then, he went by the nickname Jackie Robinson. Henry recalls his own experiences with racism in the Army, beginning during his training in England.
And we, as black soldiers, we encountered quite a bit of, segregation. See, white soldiers spread rumors to the English women that we had tails and all that stuff like that and infested with disease. What they didn't want, the black soldiers, fraternizing with the white girls, white women over there during that time. We had Southern officers. I remember my commander, and he just resented to see the black soldiers courting the English women and stuff like that. We befriended them because I remember very distinctly, I was invited to a Welch family down in Swansea, South Wales. We were stationed down there. Glen's M. Powell, she invited me for tea one Sunday afternoon. And I goes in the kitchen, very nice, neat, immaculate place that they had. And I go to sit down in a regular hard chair, and she said, "Wait, just a moment, let me get a pillow." And I was reading, she said, "To my spectator said, don't want you to hurt your tail." Thought, they hadn't been acclimated to, about blacks and that. They thought we had tails because white soldiers spread that propaganda that we had tails and infested with disease and everything. And that was very humiliating. You over there fighting for your country and your comrades, your fellow soldiers, spread those rumors there just to deter you for fraternizing with a white woman during that time. But we persevered.
For many of the people in Europe, meeting African American troops was their first encounter with black people. Henry found them generally open and warm, especially the kids.
And I used to feel I had a lot of sympathy for those kids. They used to be around the mess hall. We had field mess out. Wasn't no mess hall, it's a field kitchen. And we better eat little kids. Hey Joe, can I have a chocolate? Give me something to eat. They like that, It was innocent kids, French kids, but when they got the German kids, asking for food like that. And so I'll share my C ration, the K ration with some of them, give them a chocolate bar, cheese bar, like that stuff there, cause it wasn't their fault, the kids' fault, but I had a lot of sympathy for them.
Yeah. Can I tell you a story? I want to pause now to tell you the story I told Henry that day. It goes like this. Back in 2014, I took a 3-week trip through Europe, following my grandfather's World War II route through France, Belgium, and Germany, many of the same places where Henry served. I traveled solo and often found myself striking up conversations with bus drivers, my Airbnb hosts, and fellow tourists. In a German village named Schwäbisch Hall, I met a white-haired German man, also traveling alone, who happened to speak perfect English. Across the gap between our breakfast tables, he asked me what I was doing in this little town so far from the typical tourist route. I explained that my grandfather had been stationed in the village after the war, and he'd fallen in love with it. So much so he had a picture painted of it, one that hangs in my home today. The man asked, "And he is dead?" I nodded. He asked, "And you promised?" Again, I nodded. He bowed his head. I told him I was a little nervous telling Germans about my pilgrimage. In France and Belgium, the Americans were liberators, and in Germany, occupiers. He studied the white tablecloth for a moment. Then he said, "I was 6 years old when the Americans crossed the Rhine. 2 American troops came to my house. One was white, one was black. They gave me pineapple and chocolate." He had a transcendent smile on his face as he relived those first sweets. He spread his hands wide on the tablecloth, looked me right in the eye, and said, "And that is how I came to know Americans." I think about all those little kids who met Henry Wilson, who tasted their first chocolate given to them by a black man. I think about how that simple interaction might have changed their lives, their perspectives on the world outside of their small war-torn towns, about how easy it is to make a connection that can alter history, and what a tragic waste it is when we fail to seize those opportunities. For Henry, the racism, the prejudice, the belittling comments, none of it mattered when things got really bad.
But in the heat of combat, they come to love each other, or we came to love each other. Yeah, because your life could depend on him, or my life could depend on him. So you just had to forget about the prejudices and all that stuff.
Of course, after his time in service, Henry returned home to a country still bitterly divided by race, to a South plagued by Jim Crow laws. He married, raised 8 children, and worked for R.J. Reynolds for 36 and a half years, rising to the role of supervisor in the maintenance department. He also volunteered with the American Legion and Tarheel Boys State, mentoring African American youths. This work was truly his life's passion, sparked by the suffering he witnessed in Europe, particularly among the young children. When I asked him what we can do to make things better today, his answer was one word: education. He spoke honestly about the ongoing struggle for equity in our community and our country, but remained hopeful.
But see, I love this country because I'd rather be here than be in some of those places over there, because I was all the young people who think about defending this country, because I wouldn't want to see it to happen to my children, grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren coming on there, because war is really devastating. It is devastating, I'm telling you. And so we, as a people, we got to live together, so we may as well treat each other like human beings and all be one, because I wouldn't want to see war or fighting on this precious American soil, because it is devastating. It is.
Mr. Henry Wilson died on March 9th, 2019, at the age of 95. He was a true American hero. Soldier's Heart is written and produced by me, Cyndi Briggs, and features veteran stories from North Carolina. We honor vets by listening to their stories. You can follow along on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Soldiers Heart NC. If you have an idea for a story or interview, email us at soldiersheartnc@gmail.com. Special thanks to the New Winston Museum of Winston-Salem, North Carolina, where all of these stories are archived. You can learn more about the museum at newwinston.org.